Okay, in this video I'm going to talk about some land use changes that are being proposed in Calgary, Alberta. I understand there's a lot of chatter on social media. I'm not very heavily into social media, but I understand there's some chatter about this change that's being proposed. I just wanted to maybe um, do a video just to help explain what it is, what it means, and how we actually got here. So I know some history to how this has evolved to this point. So I'll focus this conversation on the community of Capitol Hill. So downtown Calgary is right here, and the community of Capitol Hill is just up here. So it's considered an inner city community right here. It's right near the well, I guess it's this whole area right in here, right just north of North Hill Mall and the Southern Alberta Institute of Technology. And so why I'm doing this conversation is because some people would have received a letter that looked kind of like this. So you only got this letter if you lived on one of these RCG sites or next to one of these RCG sites. And basically it's just a letter talking about, yeah, there's going to be some changes to the RCG, and it's just a notice of a public hearing regarding this matter. So maybe if you listen to this video, maybe if you plan to attend the public hearing, maybe this will help inform you a little bit of what it is and what it means and how we got there. And so the letter that was provided takes you to a web page which gives more information on the changes being proposed. So what you see here is most of Calgary being shown here, but all the sites in pink are where these RCG land use sites exist currently right now. So it's not across the city by and large, but you'll see there's lots of speckles of them here throughout some inner city communities, and then some other communities, both inner city and outlying. It looks like obviously have some of this RCG stuff going on as well. So again, where I'll focus this conversation here is on Capitol Hill. I suspect though it's probably the same. Probably those other communities are seeing some of the same stuff being done as well. Same developments, I should say, as well. And so if I zoom in here in Capitol Hill, this is 16th Avenue down here, so that North Hill Mall is here, and SAIT is here. So there's a bunch of RCGs down 17th Avenue, and there's a cluster of them here on 20th Avenue, which is a secondary road or a collector road, I think is what they call it. So lots on there, and then there's lots down 24th Avenue as well, and there's some that extend down 19th Street here. 19th Street is a bit of a major street as well. So 19th Street here, 14th Street here, and 10th Street here. So they're usually clustered. I see there's a few single RCGs, which is kind of interesting. I'll talk about that a little bit as well. Most of them occur on corners, but there are the odd ones that aren't on corners, which are kind of interesting. So I think we better talk about those as well. And just for some really broad context, I'm going to go all the way back to 1925-ish and take a look at Calgary. So here's the Bow River running through there. So our downtown core is in this area here. And so if we zoom up to where Capitol Hill is today, this is what it looked like in 1925. So this is SAIT right there. North Hill Mall would be sitting on this site. And this is kind of the right side of Capitol Hill. And there's the west side of Capitol Hill right there. And so as you can see, there was certainly some housing development occurring kind of sporadically through this area. You can start to see the streets forming, and so this major road right here is 14th Street, which is well known today. So if we zoom ahead to 1948, this is kind of what it looked like. So again, here's SAIT right here. North Hill Mall is still not there, and the eastern side of Capitol Hill has become quite developed. Confederation Park, obviously the creek coulee is there, but it's not developed the way we know it today. And then you'll see on the west side of Capitol Hill, it's still under development in 1948. So this right here would be the community association lands right there, it looks like. Then if we jump ahead from 1948 to 1953, here's what we have. So basically the establishment of Capitol Hill at its fullest is pretty much visible here. So there's SAIT again. There's the North Hill Mall site. So obviously the mall still wasn't built in 1953. There's the Capitol Hill Community Association site. There's Capitol Hill School. and so on and so forth. So Confederation Park would be occurring in here. So that was kind of the edge of the city essentially. So this was um, a suburb when it first started in the 50s. And so if we just zoom in on some of these sites, some of these houses still exist in the community, but they are disappearing fast. But largely they were bungalows on 50-foot lots. And so if we look at our city now, I'm just going to put a pin here. There we go, just so you can see how the city has grown since since the 1950s. Okay, so you know, it was a suburb in the 50s, and now this, it's the city has expanded quite a bit. And so the reason I share that is that, it's just kind of to illustrate that um, when the community was created in the 50s, essentially for the most part, it was essentially what you would call an RC1 today, so single family home community. I can only speculate to what that might have meant at the time, but I'm guessing that a lot of families probably lived in this neighborhood in the 50s, and it was probably everybody grew up kind of at the same time, and everybody sort of left at the same time. I guess the young people would have left at the same time. And so since then, I would say the community, I've been in the community for about 20 years, but more than 20 years, I guess, but it's probably quite different than what it was originally. It still is primarily a single family home community, but a lot of infills are starting to replace the old 50s houses, but there's still a lot of 50s houses around. But you'll see if I maybe look down here. So the 50-foot lots are getting divided into 25-foot lots, and then either the single houses are being put in, or semi-detached houses have gone in. So that's kind of, by and large, I'd say in the last 20 years or so, that's really been the primary kind of development that or redevelopment that this community has seen. So I think this street view here, this block, gives a good representation of how this community has looked for a long time. And then if we just flip around from that one, what started to happen over time was either, like I mentioned, these single homes going in, or the duplex type homes right there. Okay, actually that one there is, oh yes, it is a duplex. So, again, a 50-foot lot would have been subdivided into, well, actually what probably happened here, considering there's a single there, this was probably a 75-foot lot with one house on it. And so a developer bought the one house, ripped it down, and put in a semi-detached with two houses there and then one house there. It's likely what happened in that case right there. And if I just go down the street here, I'd like to show this one because it is possible to do three-story houses in the current land use, even for like a single-family home. You can't do 3 stories, and there's some couple of examples of that right there. So, anyways, this went on for decades, and zoom ahead to in the last 10 years, I guess maybe the envelope's been pushed a little bit, and there were some people looking to do some developments that were beyond a semi-detached. And an example of some of the stuff that was kind of happening, and I'm not a real big fan of this development, but um, something like this started to occur. So this is under an MCG zone. And so the MCG was kind of a big step from the RC2 that existed. And so at some point the city said and people would get freaked out when stuff like this was being proposed. And so there was kind of this missing middle is what they call it, of housing between the single family home, whether it be a new infill or not, or even a semi-detached, to stuff like this. And this one here is actually they're 3-story homes, but the MCG is a grade oriented. You have to have entries at grade, but it could be kind of more apartment style above, basically. So anyways, it was a big leap. And so the city realized this, residents realized this, and so the discussion came up to, well, we should probably have something that's a better bridge between the single family or semi-detached to this. And so what came out of that was a pretty lengthy, I think it went on for a couple of years, if not more, of public engagement through the community association to the, basically the community association just kind of hosted the city of Calgary to do some open houses and stuff where residents could come in and make comments and give their opinions and stuff like that. It's went on for quite some time. The development of what we know today as the, I'll just go to low density here, of the RC, where is it here? RCG district right there. Okay, so all the housing, as generally speaking, was R2 at this point, and RCG was going to be that middle housing type between the R2 and the MCGs. And the MCGs you find under the multi-residential. Here it is right here, MCG. So multi-residential contextual grade oriented. So it had to be grade oriented, but it was definitely a multi-residential type use. So there was something missing. And so that RCG was basically created over several years. And now I was trying to find the initial concept drawings for the RCG, but really what it was a row house idea. And so the idea was any 50-foot lot could have roughly 3 row houses on it. And so the idea was, I think, if I remember correctly without looking at it, I think it had a lesser of a front setback. But, the idea roughly was, well, could this be done? Let's do 3 row houses like this. And it was also an idea of like, maybe a developer buys 2 lots and has 100 feet, and then they don't have to worry about the, they could develop without worrying about the setback from the side property. I think the idea was as well, maybe it's possible to get an agreement with the neighbor to be able to build up to the property line. But that was, that was kind of far-fetched. I think that idea that somebody would just allow that to happen, the neighbor would agree to that. But a lot of developments we're seeing will have 100 feet, for example. But the idea was something like that. So if you had 100 feet, you'd be looking at six row houses, and if you had 50 feet, you'd be looking at 3 row houses with with the garages in the back, just kind of the way we see them right now. So that was the initial idea. And there were massing sketches from the city of Calgary showing this concept, and this is what they were envisioning happening. And they didn't just make this up. You can go look all over the world and see this type of housing. And so, images like this come to mind when you think about row housing around the world. And here's some London row housing, for example. So, certainly not something any planner invented in Calgary. And I remember when this was proposed originally, this RCG for this row housing, people were super concerned, but this is not groundbreaking for sure. And Calgary actually has some examples of this as well, both in recent times and in past. So let's take a look at those. And so here's an example of a more historical one from Inglewood. There's there. I'm going to zoom over to more of the downtown area. And so this one here is on 9th Street Southwest. Okay, so historical example. So these existed. And more recent ones, I'll head over to Earlton. And so this is in Earlton. So this is a more, recent. These are fairly old, I guess, but more recent example of row housing. So that was kind of the intent of that row housing, was something kind of like this. And this isn't continuous. It has some breaks in it here. So again, this concept could have been applied to a 100-foot lot, or actually there's one developer in Capitol Hill that owns something like 8 houses down a block. So I don't know how much frontage he has, but he has well over 100 feet. So this is possible, and it exists. And if I give my opinion to it, when I think about 20th Avenue, for example, I think this would be quite lovely down 20th Avenue, something like that. But that's just my opinion. And just going back to the map of the RCGs, so that row housing typology would have been down, say, 20th Avenue here on both sides, and down 20th Avenue on both sides here, down the north side of 17th Avenue, because the south side's like apartment buildings and stuff like that. So again, it was that going from a higher density to a medium density to a low density kind of idea on the major thoroughfares. So it's pretty straightforward concept there. And so this is 24th Avenue here. And again, so that was the intent. So what actually started to happen though was that none of these sites, I guess inner block, were actually getting developed that way. What was actually happening was very quickly the developers realized that the corner lots held some value. Okay, so if we these are both fairly recent row houses right here on the corner lots, and so a lot of the corner lots were getting rezoned to this RCG because the potential. This is one of the first ones actually that came up in the community. I think right here. Um, what started to show up was this. Okay, so they realized if you're on a corner lot, you got 1, 2, 3, 4 units facing the street. Okay, with the garage in the back. And I'll get to parking in a minute. So that's what first started to pop up. And so if you drive around the neighborhood or walk around, there's a lot of that on the corner lots. Let's just go back in time and just take a look at what this looked like prior to those row houses. And so here's what you had before on the streets, basically. So most of the streets in the neighborhood didn't have houses facing the street. So what you got was a side of a house. This is the back door of the house. So a lot of times the back door was not on the side. But you get the side of the house and you get a fence and a garage. So that's kind of how our streets were. So, when I had young kids, when we go trick-or-treating, you didn't go down the streets unless you were trying to get to an avenue because nobody actually lived on the streets. Everybody lived on the avenues. So um, they were really I'm going to say somewhat dead streets. There was certainly no life to them because nobody actually really lived on them. And I just whipped across the street here to this one here as well. So, as you see, so this one has no door, right? So it's a pretty typical situation with a side yard fence, side yard of a house, and that's all you really see. So again, zoom ahead to present day, and what we have now is this and that. Okay, and so in my opinion, I think this has greatly improved the streets. I think it was quite brilliant, actually. And I think it's really made a change to the community. Now, was it impactful to some people? Yes. So if we look at an original 1950s house, this would be that one there. That new row house is beside it. You can see right away that there's far more building mass here now. And now, originally there would have been a house right there, right? And now there's building mass facing the yard. So there's certainly an impact on these 1950s house. But let's take a look at the situation of, say, this 1950s house is torn down and replaced with a semi-detached or single detached infills, because that's likely what will happen. I think most of the 1950s houses will disappear over time. We've been seeing that for over a decade now happening through the community. I actually found a better spot here in 24th Avenue to kind of illustrate this idea here. So we have a 4-unit row house there and a 4-unit row house here, an original 1950s house there. These are newer single detached infill houses. Okay, and so again, the impact is on this 1950s house is bigger because there's more wall there, looking down into the yard. But if you assume that this 1950s house gets built into an infill, let's just say semi-detached or something like that, what you end up getting is something kind of like that. Okay, and you can, and if you think I'm making this up, just look across the street. That's the reality. The houses got narrower, so they got deeper, and so the impact is certainly yes, less. There, it's still there. There's still a building facing that yard, but it certainly is reduced compared to, say, the original homes. And actually, I didn't even need to draw that because here it is right here. So there's the row house, and there's a brand new semi-detached house. There's 2 houses right there on this lot there. And so yes, there's still an impact. What I actually like about this, I don't know what time of year this image was taken, but you can actually see some of the shadowing impact. It looks like the shadow is kind of ending in that area there. So yeah, there's an impact on this house in particular. This one here, probably there's not much shadowing impact. And I guess the other impact would just be, um, any sight lines from the second floor of this house looking down. I believe what was being done there, I can't be certain about it, but I think there was some opaque windows being put in, so frosted windows, so that you weren't just staring down into someone's yard. I'm not sure if that's still something that's happening or not. But if you're an adjacent landowner, that's certainly something you could be asking for. And so I've just gone into Street View here on that 24th Avenue, and so there's those single-family homes there, the newer ones. And I'm going to go back in time here to what was here before. And this 24th Avenue, not on the south side. So the south side always had houses facing the avenue. The north side always, I shouldn't say always is. A lot of them were, again, that side yard situation. So you just see in the side of a house and a fence essentially all the way across all the way down 24th Ave was it was very common to see this. So again, side yard. So again, nobody, if you're across the street, you're staring at someone's fence or the side of their house was kind of how it was working. So even if those 1950s houses got replaced with infills, that's still what you get, right? So you get the side of a house and a fence on the side of a garage. And so not, the same issue that the streets had. The north side of 24th Avenue kind of had this not perfect situation as well. To address that, so these certain single-family homes were actually these ones are a little bit older, but the city started to say, well, put the door to the house on this corner. So instead of the door being right around the corner, it would be right here. It's still not quite as nice as, say, that situation. So by having these row houses and people actually living off this avenue, I think it's done great improvements to this avenue. I think it's bringing life back to an avenue that was lacking some life, and I firmly believe that, like, if the more of this that gets built facing the avenue, and the bike lanes are actually going to help with this too. That the slower people are going to start going, they're going to realize it's people's homes and it's a community, and I just see nothing but benefits from this personally. But to each their own. I'm sure there's lots of opinions to that. Okay, so let's talk about the elephant in the room with these row houses. So, this is always everybody's concern is parking. And so what's being provided with these row houses is one stall per unit. But there's a catch to that. And I'm going to zoom down to a row house right. Yes, this one here, I think's got it. So it's one stall per primary unit. What started to happen though was 4 row houses turned into 4 plus 4 suites. So granny suites or basement suites or secondary suites, whatever you want to call them. Again, I personally don't have issues with this. I think it's fantastic. If we go back to those images of row housing in London, looks awful familiar. I think maybe even the one in Inglewood had that too, or maybe the one on 9th Street. But nonetheless, secondary suites got added to some of these row houses. And so one stall per unit, but there was no parking required for the secondary suite if it was under a certain size. Without looking at the land use bylaw, I think it was 40 or 45 square meters, one of the two. So these suites were being designed to be less than that so that no additional parking was required for them because you just don't have room for more parking, right? Like you've got, it's perfect for four garages. Um, I'm actually okay with that. Personally, it was a really contentious issue when the suited ones started coming out. I think generally the one stall per unit was generally okay with people. But when the suites came in, I was like, whoa, and now you got 8 units and not enough parking. That started to raise some red flags, I believe, with people. But my personal opinion, again, this is just me personally. University of Calgary is right there. SAIT is right here. Train station's right here at the mall. There's another train station over here. Uh, my personal opinion is if you're living in a basement suite of 40 square meters, you might not have a car. You might, but you might not. I think a lot of students could rent these type of things. And I should also mention too, like in the history of the original housing, the 1950s housing, I don't know the percentage, but a lot of the 1950s houses had what you call illegal suites. The basements were converted to suites to accommodate all these students. So I just see that these new now legal suites that are actually safer because they're actually built to be suites, being filling that same need basically. And being that yeah we have some bike lanes and we have pretty good transit options, and quite frankly you can walk to downtown in an hour. It's pretty close. Um, and a bike ride's like 10-15 minutes to downtown at the most. And so, anyways, yeah, parking's always the issue with people. So I don't know. I've just kind of gotten over the idea that I can park in front of my house, and I'm okay with it. I have a lane. I have access to a garage on the lane. I'm fortunate that I own a house and have a lane, so sometimes I can't park in front of my house. Primarily, my issue with parking is it's not because I have a bunch of basement suites and all this kind of stuff. It's more the state students kind of pile up in front of my house, but I'm okay with that. It's like whatever. I just park in the back alley when I need to. Um, so anyways, moving on from the parking there, we'll get into that a little bit more because one of the changes that's being proposed in the revision to the RCG, that's what I'm going to call it, a revision to the RCG, is parking, which I do actually kind of have an issue with. Okay, and so next I'm going to move on to what actually started to happen. So we know what happened in the corner lots here, but what actually started to happen for the mid-block sites. So again, that idea was to do that row housing type thing, which exists all over the world. It exists in Calgary, but I'm going to say there was um, at the most, I'm going to say there was a handful of developers that said not feasible. No, not going to work. I can remember a letter in particular from someone saying, no, we can't sell those skinny row houses, not doable. And so what actually started to pop up was um, the RCGs basically in the inner blocks were not working for them, according to, again, I'm going to say at the most a handful of developers. Um, and so what they started doing was they started doing land use changes from the RCG, or, for example, this site would have been two houses this would have been an RC2 houses. But rather than change it to RCG, I believe they bumped it up to the MCG again. And what this allowed them to do is get, I believe it's 8 units here. Let me just count what's happening. Actually, it appears this one has 7, but anyway, 7 or 8 units on a site. And so, in a nutshell, what was happening instead of the skinny row housing down the street, you got row housing down the street. So I'll just go into street view here. So yes, the row housing showed up, but what came with it was a bunch of row houses in the back as well. And so what these developments have is a bit of a courtyard here. So the front of these row houses in the back faces this courtyard. The front of the ones on the street faces street. And in the back, you can see they still have, the parking required. So I counted 7 units in that one. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 units. So they did the 1 stall per unit in that case. So this is what started to happen. And again, it was this idea that those row houses don't work, even though it exists all over the world. It doesn't work, but this does work. We can make this work. And, I'm not a developer, so maybe there's some truth to that. Maybe there's not, but I would like an explanation as to why we see it elsewhere in the world and, even in Canada, right? Even in Calgary. Why is it we can see row housing with the little backyards and the garages, but yet it's not feasible here? So that's interesting to me. But anyways, what we started to get was that. I'm going to call them front backs. So you got some front and back units. And so that one happened there. And the next one that came along is this one right here. It's under construction right now. You can see the 4 units going in on the front right there. And I think there's 4 in the back with the courtyard in the middle. I think that one's nearly done now. There's one I've noticed just recently over on 17th Avenue. I think it's these 3 houses right here. I think might have been taken down. and they're doing the front back thing. So I don't know how many row houses there are, but that one's getting developed. Something might be 100 feet, but it might be 150. I can't remember. There's a really beautiful one over here. Okay, so this one's a little bit different because they had more depth on this one. So they have row houses facing the avenue, and then they have like a mews in there, like their garages are in the inside here. Very nice development though. If we go back on time in time on this one, I don't know how personally I don't know how somebody couldn't like what's here compared to what was there before. But again, design, architecture, it's a matter of opinion. And so here was that development before. So there's 14th Street there. And again, just there's 3 or 4 houses along there. Okay, so this is what this avenue was before. Unfortunately, this is the current street view, so I have to go out like this to kind of see what's there. But anyways, that's kind of what it is now. So a whole bunch of row housing facing the street. So looks quite nice in my opinion. And those are of quite nice quality as well. Okay, and so anyways, that's where we are today, is that what is actually being built in the inner lots, not the corners, are these front back scenarios like that. There's another one actually under construction right now somewhere around here, if you want to look around. And so again, the zoning doesn't allow this type of development right now. Okay, so they're doing land use changes for this. So when I got that letter talking about the revisions to the RCG, I suspected the revisions were going to be to accommodate this building form, and my suspicions were correct when I started to look into it. Now, I think I'm just going to mention, like, so this wasn't the original intention of the RCG. Um, do I have a huge problem with it personally? Not really. I do really still personally like to hang on to the idea of that row housing down 20th would have been really awesome, with where people have little backyards. This isn't real tested, I don't think. Like, how much sun actually gets in that courtyard, how much privacy are you actually getting? Like, I don't know. It's like communal living almost. It's I don't know. Time will tell, I guess, if these stay of value or not to people, or do they sell or whatever. I don't know that answer, but I feel confident that row housing, like we looked at earlier on, um, would have been marketable. But again, I'm not a developer. That said, though, I have spoken to other developers who have done the corner lots and said, so what? You don't think you could make money off of 3 row houses on a 50-foot lot? And the response from at least one developer, I'm not going to say a lot because it was just one person that has developed a corner lot, and they were like, oh, absolutely you could. But some other developers are saying, nope, not feasible. And I've seen the letter pretty much stating that argument when some land use changes were being proposed. So, so anyways, I'm just going to jump now to the City Calgary webpage. And so this is where the letter kind of took you and shows the changes. So we were looking at that citywide map where the sites were. And so there's actually a couple of things happening here. They're going to do a new land use called HGO. I didn't even look at that one that much, but it looks to me like it's that front back scenario like we just saw with garages with a 12-meter height. That doesn't apply to Capitol Hill, like, because our lots are RCG. So I just kind of skipped past that one. But let's go to the RCG one, and my suspicions were true. So it was the front building at 11 meters, that's the allowable height for like a single family home, for example, or semi-detached as well. And then the courtyard, they're going to specify a certain dimension for that, and then you can do some houses in the back. And then you'll notice here there's only 3 garages there, so we'll get to that in a second. So that is kind of what's being proposed. So again, what you see here is kind of what's being proposed. I should mention as well, so these ones here don't have the secondary suites in them, so they've provided that 1 stall per unit, which I'm pretty happy with. I believe this one getting built down here didn't have the suites, and that was 1 stall per unit. The one that's being built right now here somewhere. It's the front, it's actually a 50-foot lot, so it's not 100 feet, it's a 50-foot lot, but they're going to do the 4 units plus the secondary suites. So the way it is right now, they'll have to provide 4 parking stalls for the 4 primary units, and they won't have to provide parking stalls for the secondary units as long as they're under that certain square footage or square meters. So it'd be like this, basically. Same kind of concept. So, if the if this housing type here is the greatest thing in the world, and everybody loves it, and it retains its value and it's desirable, then again, I don't really care if the secondary suite is there or not, and I don't really care if there's parking. But I do like to see that 1 stall per primary unit. And again, just if you're just tuning in now, I'm okay with a secondary suite not having the parking because of our proximity to SAIT and UFC. It just doesn't really bother me personally. So yeah, so anyways, the one getting built over here is going to have yeah, so it's going to have 4 parking stalls probably, unless that one asks for a relaxation, and it's got 4 primary units with the secondary suites. I'm okay with that. Again, though, I still like the idea of the row housing, and I just don't buy into it's not profitable, but whatever. And so what I see happening here is plain and simple is that I think we have a lobby group telling the planners that row housing, like we see all over the world and how we see in Earlton, can't work, not possible, not feasible. We wouldn't make any money. Not going to happen. So we need to do this so we get more units and we can actually make money. That's my guess. And the city has responded to that and are going to accommodate it. So you can form your own opinions on that however you want. But I kind of wonder why we're not just holding the line and retaining the original idea and saying, if you want to build these things right here, then you can go through the land use change process. I don't know that we need to revise RCG so they don't have to go through that process anymore, because the intent of the RCG, unless again it has been absolutely 100% with certainty illustrated to the planners and policymakers that that 3-unit row housing or 6-unit on a 100-foot lot row housing is not feasible, then fine. But again, I see examples all over the world, and I'm having a hard time with that personally. Okay, so that's really the bulk of the change that's being made. But the other thing they're putting in here is this right here. So the minimum parking required is 0.375 stalls per unit and suite. And now they give an explanation why. They say they're trying to align, like if you get into mixed use developments, so maybe something like this. So you have maybe commercial on the main floor and then residential above. So very, very common building type. We have one being built over here in Capitol Hill in the corner, which again, I love it. It's a 6-story building, so it's commercial on the main floor and 5 stories of wood above. And I think it's very fitting for that site, being on the intersection of 14th Street and 20th Avenue. No problems with that at all. But I think, I didn't look into the land use, but probably, I think from the explanation I read in the City of Calgary webpage, they're saying they're just trying to align the parking requirements across the board for all these multifamily housing. And that happens to be 0.375 stalls per unit and suite. So now they're including the suite. So there's no more, if you're under a certain area, you don't need a parking stall. But the reality of this is, if we look at the examples being done, if we had that 50-foot lot with the 4 units, let's just say it was just 4 units on a 50-foot lot, front back units, 2 in the front, 2 in the back, that ends up being 1.5 stalls. So you'd have 2 stalls. So only 2 stalls are required for the 4 units, 4 primary units. If you did the 4 primary units with the secondary suites, I was just doing the math here. You had 8 units, so you had 4 primary, 4 secondary, you'd only need 3 stalls instead of the current 4. Now, and again, the reasoning is here, and just saying they're just trying to align this stuff across the board. My personal feeling on that is I think they should leave it at 1 stall per primary and not have anything required for the secondary suites if it's under a certain size. That's my personal opinion. Um, I see the nature of a mixed use development like this one here being quite different. I think when you have condos or apartments in the inner city, I think some of the people that are buying those are probably less likely. Some of them would be less likely to have a car. So the 0.375 per unit might actually work for those. I'm not 100% convinced personally that the nature of these developments in this neighborhood, for example, is of that same caliber. Because generally those mixed use larger developments are actually closer to busier areas where there's more walkable services, trains and buses and stuff like that. Whereas Capitol Hill is quite well suited to that stuff. It is around, but um, it's certainly no Martel Loop or something like that. So the nature to me, like if you're buying a house or renting a house, or sorry, I should say a house, one of these units in one of these right here, I tend to think that yeah, it's likely you will have one car. So my personal opinion is leave it the way it is, because the idea of let's just make it the same across the board makes sense on paper. And you know what I mean? That's easy, and then it's less confusing in the land use bylaw. But is the nature of the two scenarios the same? And I don't think it is. Again, you can form your own opinions on that. So I have a feeling that's going to become the big elephant in the room, and I think that's going to really bother people. Again, I can see past this type of development, whatever. Um, I like the idea of the row housing. I'd like to see that done as well. Should the city be just essentially bending over and being like, yeah, you're right. Let's just change it so it's easier. I don't know. I don't know. I have a hard time with that, but whatever. If that's the case, fine. They can sell that case. But I'm not 100% sold on this parking situation personally. And at the end of the day, it's one stall, like whatever. It's not going to be the end of the world. But why? Why? Why not just leave it and cause us all less headache? My other concern personally when I see that if we ended up, so if you just assumed that we're going to have a shortage of parking and the streets are going to get packed. I mean, they certainly are not right now. I mean, they are when SAIT's in, for example, but it's not. I mean, it's not this horrendous situation for sure. But I'm a huge proponent of 20th Avenue getting bike lanes. I think it's absolutely absurd that we don't have them down 20th Avenue. It's a no-brainer in my opinion. But the more of these developments that get built with potentially lack of parking, the less likely that bike lane is ever going to happen, because there will be more and more cars put on that road. And that's my kind of other concern with just reducing the parking. It was already a hard pill for a lot of people to swallow, the one stall per unit and none for the suite. And now you're actually making it less. So I have concerns that this is going to make it very difficult to ever achieve any progression, say on 20th Avenue, and we need it. I walk, I ride my bike, I do it all, and 20th Avenue needs it, and I would love to see some leadership in getting that done from some officials. But anyways, that's kind of the history of where we're at and what that RCG is proposing. So hopefully you got something out of that video. And all the best to you. And I guess just make your own opinions and let your counselor know how you feel about it. I should just say you should write your counselor, and also on the webpage there's a option to submit comments or speak at the public hearing, which is October 4th, 2022. And maybe just in closing on this, again, I'll just maybe give my personal opinions to this. Am I completely bent out of shape of what I'm seeing here on 20th Avenue, the front back scenario? Not really. I mean, I think it's a reasonable, um, nice looking, nice mass, missing middle development, right? I guess like if you're looking for something kind of in between that more apartment condo type thing to single family homes and semi-detached homes, this is a pretty good fit. The row housing's a good fit too. So, I'm not saying that this shouldn't exist anywhere. And if the market loves this and it brings people into the community to live, fantastic. I'm happy to see that. I just, I just wonder if is the row housing, um, say the 6 units across 100 feet, is that really not feasible is my bigger concern. And again, I'm not a planner. I'm hoping the planners have done all that homework. I'm hoping they have engaged more than just a handful of developers that are building these things. That's kind of my concern. That I have a feeling, I don't know this, but I worry that it's a small group that's saying that other stuff doesn't work, and we haven't even tested the other stuff yet. Everybody's kind of defaulted to this, and we haven't tested in this community what we see in, say, Earlton, for example. So I'm just going to say I'm going to put my trust in the planners. I don't question everything my doctor does. I'm not going to question everything planners do. That's their expertise. And I'm going to trust that, I'll give them some feedback, some local feedback, but I'm going to trust that they make the right decision on these things and hope they're not just catering to a small development group that has told them one thing. I just hope they've done their homework and are absolutely convinced that the other housing type isn't feasible. Because again, I question, well, how was it feasible in Earlton? Okay, how is it feasible elsewhere in the world? And then end of the day, if you change the RCG, if you can get 8 units on a lot doing the front back versus 6 row houses, well, what do you think? What are you going to default to? Probably the 8 units. However, sometimes the market talks, and maybe somebody will decide that, yeah, this isn't that popular. We are having a hard time selling these things, and maybe somebody will play with that 6 unit across 100 feet or whatever. Who knows? So I'm not overly concerned about the whole thing. I think they should leave the parking the way it is. Other than that, I think this is reasonable for the corridors mentioned. Now, on that note, that just made me remember one other thing, and this is kind of important. So if the front back type scenario is the right answer, then yeah, whatever, down 20th Avenue, down 24th Avenue, 17th Avenue, great. Where it does get a little weird though is when you have these is a corner unit, but there's like this one here. Okay, so that individual unit there in the middle of the block is RCG. That one there is kind of in the middle of the block in RCG, and I'm not as familiar with what's going on in these other communities, but they might have some. It looks like it's mostly corner lots, but there's a couple of weird ones out there like that one and that one. Whereas if we go back to the satellite view and take a look at one of these scenarios, so I think it was this site here, one of these ones. But yeah, I'd say those couple of lots we were looking at, they're kind of mid-block. I'm not sure which lot it was, but I'm not sure why they're zoned RCG. It's kind of interesting, but whatever. You're gonna end up with something like that. So I think if you if you did the front back scenario on there, I think it's a little bit odd for a mid-block site for sure. I mean, if the future of the lot or of the block, I should say, is going to be single family or semi-detached homes, I would say then throwing one of those in the middle of it's a little bit odd. But when you're looking at larger picture growth, if you're kind of planning that, yeah, like maybe 20th Avenue does become primarily this stuff and it's concentrated, across the board, then I think that's a little more reasonable. But those one-offs are kind of interesting. I'm not sure why they are the way they are, but I think they certainly need to be addressed in some way. But anyways, I'll leave it at that. Hopefully that offered some insight into where things are at, what the RCG is, where it came from, and where we are now. And hopefully you got something out of this video. And maybe the best thing anybody could do is, put down the Nextdoor app, go for a walk, check out some of these places that exist, get a feel for it. And if one's really lucky, maybe you'll actually talk to the people that live there and you can ask them why they live there, if they like it. And probably one would realize that there's some really good people living there, and this housing type maybe gave them the opportunity to live in our neighborhood that otherwise wouldn't have existed. And if that were the case, then why would we not support this, right? That's kind of the whole point, is to create some housing so that good people can move in and join our community. Because the way it is right now, a lot of stuff is not affordable to good people. So if this is what it takes to make people happy and get good people in our community, good happy people, let's say, fantastic. I'm all for it.